didn't resign. I served 8 years. You know, I was elected, unanimously elected by the Electoral College to serve the first term. Then I was going to step down as president, but I got convinced by those around me, Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Jefferson, Knox, Adams, and others, to serve a second term. Again, the Electoral College unanimously elected me to serve 4 more years. So it was in 1797 that I was finally able to return home to my Mount Vernon, as John Adams was the second president and Thomas Jefferson his vice president. Yes.
And then how long after that did you die, General Washington?
Well, he's still alive.
You can address that.
We were home for 2 years.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
We were home for 2 years after he returned from the presidency. And during that time, we lived a very normal life. We had many visitors and so forth. But he died in 1799, today, December 14th, 1799 was his day of passing.
I was 67.
Okay, that's his birthday. Go ahead.
How many people have you killed in the wars? Too many.
Myself,
Yes.
none that I know of.
Oh.
I was the commander-in-chief. I did have across my saddle on both sides, I had a pistol. I did have my sword with me, but I only used it for commanding the troops and giving orders and getting their attention. I myself was shot at many times, had horses shot out from under me. During the French and Indian War, you hear the one battle at the Monongahela. After it was over, I realized I had 4 bullet holes in my coat and no blood was shed. And I had 2 horses shot out from under me that day. And an Indian guy shot at me once crossing a creek before the French and Indian War, and somehow he missed, and he was at point blank range. So anyway, I never was involved in killing of any individuals that I can say personally.
Are there any other questions you've just come up with lately? Does this remind you of anything else?
Ask him a question.
Oh, I kind of have a question. Yes. We have a few more minutes. If you have a question, go ahead, Joshua. Go ahead. Well, maybe they might.
Yes.
He did tell you, so what more do you want to know?
Well, we told you in our talk how it came about mostly from people feeling that we were being repressed and not given a say in the taxation from the mother country. But we also felt that we could do better by living independently, as Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, more or less instigated or thought along those lines. So once Congress set up a committee to write that document, they all contributed thoughts and ideas. And Richard Henry Lee was the main one. He was the main one that said that we should all be independent.
Yes, these United Colonies are and ought to be free and independent states, and that's part of the Declaration of Independence near the end of it. That Thomas Jefferson was responsible for writing it. Some thought Mr. Adams should, but Mr. Adams was very outspoken, and there were some that, if the words would have come from him, they would have voted against the Declaration. They thought it was better it came from Virginia, a young Virginian, Mr. Jefferson, and Mr. Adams agreed that Mr. Jefferson was the man to write it. And they constantly made changes, though. Dr. Benjamin Franklin, he made suggestions to it, and anyway, it's a very valuable document today. Both then.
Can you tell us a little bit more about those men later on in your presidency, like Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Hamilton, and working with them?
Indeed, when I was elected president, it took several months before I could pick my own personal cabinet. And I chose the wisest, most able men that I knew. Thomas Jefferson became the Secretary of State. And Secretary of the Treasury was Alexander Hamilton. Former Virginia Governor Edmund Randolph, and made Attorney General, and the head of my artillery during the Revolution, Mr. Knox, I made the Secretary of War, although he was also Secretary of War under the Articles of Confederation. Mr. Jefferson, of course, was a Virginian and very good at writing and so forth, but he had served over in France during the Revolutionary War. He was overseas working on deals with foreign powers. So he had much experience as far as that's what the Secretary of State does, has to work out things with foreign nations and make agreements and so forth with it. So that's one reason I selected him. He didn't even know he was chosen for the position of Secretary of State until he returned home to his home, Monticello. And he got the word that he'd been chosen for the Secretary of State, and immediately had to come then to New York City. Mr. Hamilton, he was one of my secretaries during the war. He also headed up an artillery group, and I had great confidence in his abilities working with figures and numbers, as he came from the Caribbean and had done that in the Caribbean, working with a merchant fleet and working with the monies that they had to deal with. So I made him Secretary of Treasury. But he had read book after book after book of people that had written about these things from all over the world, going way back in history. Likewise, Mr. Jefferson was very well read and knew how to work with groups of this nature. So they were the main reason I selected those two, indeed. But in my second term, they both resigned from my cabinet. But I had them both, I think Mr. Jefferson served 5 years with me, and Mr. Hamilton served maybe close to 6 years.
Hey, Rachel. Max, what's yours? Okay.
Can I ask why? Did you get to spend time with your family on Christmas?
We
As
did,
much-
as much as possible.
That was our favorite holiday, actually, was Christmas. And I tried to spend it in Mount Vernon, but during the war years, I never went home to Mount Vernon. So at Christmas, it was just Martha and I, because she would come to wherever we were in camp.
Except for Valley Forge, I didn't get there until February.
But we always had lots of guests at our home. And I remember one Christmas, there was a nearby in Alexandria, Virginia, there was a circus or a carnival going on, and they had a large camel. And I went up and I rented their camel and had it brought to Mount Vernon. We called it Aladdin. And I had it posted. Aladdin was out in the field right out in front of Mount Vernon. And that was just for the enjoyment of my guests, and the children were there. But the men, I would often take them on a great fox chase that day. It was one of my favorite things to do, go on a fox hunt. And I would spend much of the day out. That experience. But it was our favorite holiday because we had so many guests, friends. And of course, the children enjoyed it too when they were younger, but
Yes.
that's another story.
Awesome. Thanks.
Can I
Was
go?
our last?
Can I ask you a really good question?
What is it?
Do you think you were a better president than Donald Trump?
Okay. He doesn't know Donald Trump, so he won't know, but go ahead.
But he's just asking, what's your middle name?
I have no middle name.
What? You have to, I think.
No,
I have no middle name.
it's not a rule.
Birch Bush.